summertime. and the living is easy. Hopefully now for the rest of the season, we'll put that behind us and hopefully move into a peaceful summer. We can go on vacation and relax and be healthy, do healthy things, I hope, and hopefully have a more peaceful world, most importantly. We'll see. I think we'll know in the next couple of days. But you, you never know. This could be the beginning of a whole new chapter of much better days, but you never know. But that's a good segue into what we're reading over the next couple of weeks. We're going to be reading Daniel, the book of Daniel. We'll be reading for the next 3 weeks. And Daniel is it's a unique book in the Bible. You know, there's certain books like the Song of Songs, and I mean, every book of the Bible is unique in its own, it has its own voice, but there's certain things that, like, you know, the books of the prophets, a lot of those prophets, you know, we read through them all, but a lot of them, it's even hard to remember who said what. Not so with Daniel. Also, it's not even just the material in it, it's the pacing, it's the setting, and even though you won't notice it because we're reading it in an English translation, the language, because half of this book is written in Aramaic. Now, again, you won't notice it in the English, and I'll maybe point it out a couple of times when we get into the Aramaic, but it actually tells us a lot about the book and about the way it was composed, and it's probably the newest book of the Bible in the sense that we're not exactly sure when the book of Esther was written, but Esther was probably written a little bit before this, composed a little bit before this. And again, Ecclesiastes maybe just a little bit before this. And Ecclesiastes is tough to date because it doesn't really talk about, we have a hard time placing Ecclesiastes because there's no history in it. There's no references to people in it. There's no places that we can kind of hang. There's no clues, if you will. We really have to go by the language and kind of the philosophy of it, you know, whether it seems like this seems kind of late, right? Daniel, on the other hand, the theories about when this book was written are so precise that some people have dated this to within a 3-year period. Now that's crazy, right? Because you go, well, like, they know the earliest it could be written and they know the latest it could be written. Is that really possible? It is, if we look at the clues in the book and the feeling that the prophecies that Daniel talks about are being written by people living during a specific period. Which, again, the book of Daniel, and let me just give you kind of the overview. And you know what? I'm going to actually show it to you so that you can kind of take it in with us here. The book of Daniel is kind of divided into a couple sections. The first section, the section that we're reading, the first 6 chapters, so we'll be reading this week and next week, is very different in that they are court tales. They're stories, they're narratives, they're stories that take place with Daniel in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor of Babylon, and his successors. And then the second part of it is essentially apocalyptic visions, prophecies of things that are going to happen in the second half of it. So they're written very differently. Many people think that they're written by 2 different authors that have a slightly different agenda, and that maybe what we're really dating is the second half, the 7 through 12 chapters. There's 2 things about that again, I know I don't want to overwhelm people or bombard people with this stuff, but you have these 2 halves. And again, it's the latter half, the apocalyptic visions, that help us date the book. Not the stories, but the apocalyptic visions. 2 things, though. The first is that the first half is written in Aramaic. The problem is chapter 1 is not written in Aramaic, it's written in Hebrew. But what we believe is it's a Hebrew translation of an original Aramaic text. so that the first chapters 1 through 7 were originally written in Aramaic, and then someone took the time to translate the first chapter into Hebrew. So that's weird because it doesn't exactly line up, which is what they're kind of explaining here. The Hebrew here and kind of what they're explaining here. Well, they're talking about the chiastic structure, the structure of what happens in the first half, but the fact that again, suggestions have been made why the genre division doesn't coincide with the language change, but again, it may be because chapters 2 through 6 are the parts that are kind of like, well, they're a unit. And it's chapters 2 through 6 that people remember from Daniel. I mean, again, there are people who remember the visions of Daniel. I'm not saying there aren't, but most of us, the parts that they teach to kids are Daniel in the lion's den, the fiery furnace, the feast. Those are things that people remember from Daniel. Yeah. It's in Hebrew. So Mike just asked in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And a very interesting thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls in Daniel is that, as I mentioned, Esther is not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah. Not so with the book of Daniel. Daniel, it says right here, 8 copies of the book of Daniel, all incomplete. So we haven't found a complete book, but okay, a lot of the books in Qumran and Dead Sea Scrolls were not complete. 8 parts have been found, 8 different pieces. So copies, like this was a different copy. So they had 8 copies of it, 8 books of Daniel. That's a lot. It's a lot. They found 2 in cave 1, 5 in cave 4, and 1 in cave 6. So in one cave, in cave 4, they found 5 different scrolls or fragments of scrolls. They didn't find the whole scroll, but they could tell that there were 5 different copies by the scribal or by the vellum, by the writing surface, right? So they had a certain, they had a certain scroll was written with a certain, type of goat or whatever. They know that these were different scrolls. The point is that if you have so many copies of a book, that means the book is valuable. That means they really like the book. So if they have 5 different scrolls of it in one cave, it means that there was very valuable. And we kind of understand that because the people of Qumran were very into these kinds of prophecies. They were very into these. But the weird thing is that some of those copies in Qumran were not that old, in the sense that they weren't written that much longer after we think Daniel was first written. So for the people in Qumran, this is a new book. This isn't an old book. This is a book that maybe has been around for a generation, maybe 20 years. So this is not a book that like, oh, we love this book because everyone knows this book and it's been around for generations. It's not Shakespeare to them. It is, I don't want to use a modern version of a modern book that everyone read because everyone's would laugh if I said it, but some kind of book that everyone, yeah, Stephen King. It's more Stephen King than Shakespeare. Thank you, Mike. It's popular, but it's new. So that's really interesting. The other thing that's interesting is because we have another version of this book, the Septuagint has a different version of Daniel. And what's important about the difference is that there are 3 chapters that are not in the book of Daniel that we have that are in the Septuagint. And that's not written much after Daniel was written. So it shows that there were already very different scribal traditions. Qumran doesn't have those additions. Those 3 chapters are the what we call the Prayer of Azariah, Susanna and the Elders, and Bel and the Dragon. And we might read those just so you can see them. I mean, we've looked at the Septuagint before, but you may want to look. And it's not that they're chapter 13, 14, 15. The Prayer of Azariah is after chapter 3. Susanna and the Elders is, in some Greek versions, before chapter 1, and in some it's after chapter 12. and then Bell and the Dragon is placed at the end. And it Bell and the Dragon sounds like a really exciting dragon story from Game of Thrones. It's not. It's not what you think. It's not super exciting dragon stories. But what's interesting is that those three chapters are not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They are in the Greek version. And they made it, of course, because they're in the Septuagint, they made it into Catholic and Greek Orthodox versions. But they're not in the Protestant Bible. So the Protestants didn't keep it because the Protestants, and that is the followers and the people who followed Martin Luther, they believed that if it wasn't in the Hebrew Bible, it wasn't legit. That's interesting. It was also, to some extent, of course, a rejection of the Catholic tradition, which is the Catholics make things up. And how do they make things up? They have parts of the Bible that aren't even really part of the Bible. We don't know where that came from. It's not in the Bible. How do we know? Well, the Jews might be nuts. They might not accept Jesus, but they know their Bible and they don't have it. So we better pay attention. So the Protestants actually paid more close attention to what we call, again, our Bible, which is the Masoretic text. They paid more close attention to the Masoretic text than the longer Greek versions, which are, I mean, I like those stories. The story of Susanna, these are kind of cool stories. Not in the Bible. What do they say about the Daniel editions? They don't know from them. They don't know from them. They don't comment on them. No. They don't comment on it. And what's interesting is that, let me just find. Do we see anything else in? Oh yeah. So we talked about there's additions to Esther, for example, that are in there that are not they're not in our Hebrew Bible, but they are in the correct. And again, it's an interesting thing because the rabbis definitely, knew about Daniel. They don't quote him that much. And I think part of it was because they knew that it was a new book. And they also knew that there's things in the book of Daniel that are, well, I think it could be the fact that there's parts of Daniel that sound or ended up feeling much more comfortable in a Christian context than they did in a Jewish context. And I think by the time the rabbis are writing, they are somewhat sensitive to that in the sense that I think they thought some of the kind of revelations discussions, I think they didn't have an issue with it in the sense that it's not like they didn't have it or they didn't know that that was going on in their community. And of course, they knew the Christians were engaged in it, but there was a certain level to them of, but does that really belong in the Bible? Like, isn't that not biblical? And so I think they felt a little uncomfortable with the kind of the free form apocalyptic revelation that was, a good chunk of the last part of Daniel. That they had less of an issue with the stories of Daniel, where Daniel is behaving like a good Jew in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, but they have a tougher time with Daniel prophesizing, certain things. But here's what here's some of the things I want to tell you about, which is the fact that one of the ways that we know that Daniel is a very new book is that the apocryphal book Ben Sirach, or the Wisdom of Sirach, which is quoted by the rabbis, right? The rabbis knew about this book. It's called Ecclesiasticus in the Christian Apocrypha. The rabbis referred to Sirach. They accepted it, if you will. They didn't canonize it, but they knew it. The book is a fairly new book. It was one of the reasons why it didn't make it into the Bible. But Ben Sirach knows all the books of the Bible, but doesn't know Daniel, doesn't refer to it. And one of the reasons why we also know it's fairly late is it's not part, even though Daniel is considered a prophet, it's not part of the books of the prophets. Now, interestingly, the church put Daniel with the rest of the prophets. So we have Ketuvim, which are our That's what we're reading right now. That's kind of the miscellaneous, the grouping of all these books. The rabbis felt it was comfortable. I mean, the rabbis are the ones who made these distinctions in the Hebrew Bible. They felt it belonged in Ketuvim, whereas the Christians who didn't really care that much about how late it was thought Daniel belonged with the rest of the prophets, which is why they put it in the prophets. But here's the other thing, and this is how we get to when it was very specifically dated. So it says here, the prophecies of Daniel are accurate down to the career of Antiochus. So what is it saying is the prophecies seem to be telling exactly what's happening up till that time. After that time, it makes some predictions, and some of those predictions don't come true. Up until that time, all the predictions come true, which leads people to believe that up until that time, the guy who wrote it knew what had happened. They weren't predictions as much as they were, here's what happened. Now, this is based on the idea that, again, Daniel's real job of prophesizing, of kind of giving people an understanding and a hope of what's going to happen, is that he's writing during one of the darkest times of Jewish history up till that time, which were the persecutions of Antiochus IV. Yeah, that Antiochus, the king during Hanukkah, the guy who persecuted the Jews and who was responsible at a specific date in 167 for desecrating the temple. We know that the menorah was desecrated, and of course the Maccabees rededicated in 165. And rededicate the temple. But we know that during that time, Antiochus had a Greek idol placed in the temple, and that the temple was defiled. We don't even really know what happened because the rabbis didn't want to talk about it in its full horrific situation. They talked about it, they admitted it, the Maccabees wrote about it, but nobody, and the Maccabees give us more information than the rabbis do, because the rabbis were so offended by it. The Maccabees were like, look how horrible it is, and we cleaned it up. They wanted to make sure you knew. But even they don't really get into the details of how bad it was, because it was such an embarrassment and such a horrible thing. Now, that was done during that period of time, and Antiochus ends up dying, but he doesn't die the way the book says he's going to die. But he did die. The book was kept, even though there's a little minor difference there, because to some extent, Daniel's job is not to necessarily just predict and say what's going to happen, but to give people hope. And if it's written during that time, just before Antiochus died, that means it was written when the temple was defamed and violated, but before Antiochus died, which is between 167 and 164. So that's why I say they think it's like a 3-year window that this book was written, or at least the prophecies were written, or at least some of the prophecies were written, because it doesn't seem like the person who wrote this knew the way the story ended exactly. So it's very specific, but again, it's written with the hope that the temple will be restored, that Antiochus will die, and that things will get better. And they did get better, but only for about 75 years, because as we know, after the Maccabees' reign, the guy, King Herod, takes over, and he does not make life easy for the Jewish people after that. So the reign of the Maccabees is short, and by the time it's done, most of the Jews are not so sad to see them go, because they become pretty Greek themselves. They start out as people who really hate the Greeks, and then they wind up being pretty Greek too. And that's the truth. And so the rabbis knew that. They weren't real big fans of the Maccabean kings by the time they were done. They never should have been kings. They were priests. They were not supposed to be kings. So this was written during that period before the Maccabees become king, but before and before that the temple had been restored. So it's really written during the time of Hanukkah, but not by the time the Hanukkah story is over, as we know it. And by the way, the Hanukkah story, the way it's told, doesn't really end the story where it ends, because We end the story where Judah and the Maccabees defeat Antiochus and they rededicate the temple, and it's all good and it's all over. Guess what? It's not all over, because Judah ends up dying in battle. Actually, all four of the brothers, with the exception of Simon, there's five brothers. Simon is the only one of the five Maccabee brothers that survives. They're all killed in battle. They all die. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about the fact that Judah ended up dying in a battle that a lot of people say he shouldn't have fought, because it was not the normal nighttime guerrilla raid that he was successful in. It was an open field battle, pitched battle with the Greeks, and he got killed. So it's not the way the story usually ends for the kids. But the Maccabees were successful at least, again, not killing Antiochus. They didn't kill Antiochus. They didn't destroy the Greeks. They drove them out, and they basically created a ceasefire. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? That's the best that the Maccabees wound up with, which was a ceasefire, getting the people that they didn't like out of the temple and taking control of it themselves. So that's a little bit of the intro to Daniel. Definitely is a book that's captivated the imagination. And as we turn back to Daniel and as we read Daniel, and today we have Daniel being read by Judith, Yehudit, Bat Daniel. Or actually, no. Your dad's Hebrew name was
Daniel.
Daniel?
Yeah, Daniel.
That's appropriate.
I didn't even think of that.
Say anything more than this story, even though it was written in the 2nd century BCE, is actually set during the 6th century BC. It's set 400 years later, as if to say again, Daniel, who lived 400 years before these stories happened, prophesied what happened 400 years later. The story works much better that way. If the person who's prophesying was prophesying about what's going to happen 2 or 3 years from now, no one would say, wow, what a great prophet. I mean, I'd still think that would be pretty good. If you could prophesize, if you could tell me what's going to happen in the stock market tomorrow, I'd be pretty impressed. But 2 to 3 years is not as impressive as 400 years. And the stories of Daniel that we're going to read are, we step back in time. So again, it would be as if we were writing a story about Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is going to teach us about our lives. So it's not really Shakespeare writing Hamlet, it's Shakespeare and Shakespeare in love, rather than Shakespeare as the writer. But again, what is that? What will that tell us? And by the way, people do that all the time. The guy that we're obsessed with, who was a prophet from 400 years ago, actually 500 years ago, is Nostradamus. Everyone loves Nostradamus. It only works if Nostradamus said it. And he, of course, because he lived for 500 years ago. If he hadn't lived 500 years ago, no one would go, hey, there's a French guy that said something yesterday about what's going to happen 2 years from now. No one would be very impressed with that. But if you say Nostradamus said it 500 years ago, everyone perks up and says, Nostradamus said it. So think about it from that standpoint, that Daniel was probably a guy who had legendary status. And so when he said stuff that happened and he prophesized it, that was going to happen 400 years later, people were like, yeah, that's pretty heavy. By the way, Nostradamus was Jewish on his dad's side. Yeah. His dad's family was forced to convert to Catholicism, but yeah, he was Jewish. He knew he was Jewish. Supposedly he knew a little Hebrew. Who knows? But yeah, Jean de Nostradam took that name because they wanted to be good Catholics, but that was not their original name. It was something like Goldberg. It wasn't really Goldberg. No, it was more of a Sephardic name, but he was not Nostradam, not the Holy Mother. He was, he would have been, had a Hebrew name. It would have been something Ben something, actually, is what it would have been. So Yochanan ben, I can't remember what his dad's real name would have been, but Hebrew name. But here we go. This is set back in time. For those who remember the book of Kings, this is going back to the time of the destruction of the first temple, during the time of King Jehoiakim. Judith, you take over.
All righty. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The sovereign delivered King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power, together with some of the vessels of the house of God and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. He deposited the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief officer, to bring some Israelites of royal descent and of the nobility, youths without blemish, handsome, proficient in all wisdom, knowledgeable and intelligent, and capable of serving in the royal palace, and teach them the writings and the language of the Chaldeans.
Yeah. So what is going on here? And again, we just read the book of Esther, which took place actually a couple of hundred years after this in the court of the next empire that takes over, the Persians. But this is a little bit of what's going on in that same area, the area of Iraq and Iran, the area of Babylonia. Before that, which is what was it like to be a Jewish exile in the first generation after being brought. So the temple at this point has not even been destroyed, right? It says that Nebuchadnezzar brought in these vessels, and he has laid siege to it. He's taken the king, power of the king, and basically, the king is a vassal to him. And we're going to see, well, actually, we don't see it so much, obviously, in the book of Daniel, but we saw it in Kings. Jehoiakim decides to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar, and then he deposes him, kills him, and then puts Jehoiachin, his son, in power. And then Jehoiachin rebels, and then he puts Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's brother, in charge, his uncle. Nebuchadnezzar tries lots of Jewish kings, and none of them are subservient to him. And Zedekiah is eventually killed, he's blinded. His kids are killed, and then he's led into exile, but he's captured and humiliated and dies, a broken man. But Zedekiah is the last king of Judah. But this is in that period while the Babylonians are still trying to figure out if they can treat Israel or Judah, the kingdom, as a vassal, or whether they have to just destroy it and start over. So that's what they're dealing with. Regime change. No, it's on the other side. It's our regime that people are trying to figure out whether they need to change. And so Nebuchadnezzar takes stuff, takes gold, he takes treasures, he takes things from the temple, which is a disaster for us. Things that are supposed to be for God are now sitting in Nebuchadnezzar's house. He's drinking out of cups that were dedicated to God. That's not a good thing. And of course, he took our people. And some of those people, some of these beautiful young men, he turns them into people who are going to work in the court. And this is actually critical because in order to become one of these court people, there's the issue of whether he had to, of course, become a eunuch in order to become part of that crew, the inner circle. Again, it seems as though Nebuchadnezzar did this with all the different countries that he conquers. He brings a few of the kids from the royal family into the circle and teaches them Babylonian ways, and makes some of them kind of the Babylonian liaison, if you will, to his in this case to his Judean servants, to his subjects, right? So he's going to teach these guys the ways of the Babylonians. He's going to teach them they're intelligent kids, so he's going to teach them the smart information, the wise information, the technology of the Chaldeans, of the Babylonians. And the Chaldeans in particular are seen within the Babylonian society as the people who really know things. They're the ones who really are the Chazdim, as they're called in Hebrew, are the Chaldeans, are the inner circle of bureaucrats and technocrats and the smart people who run the country and who are the possessors of the wisdom, if you will. So it's not just the Babylonians, but specifically within that group, the Chaldeans. And you'll see that come up. Whenever you see that, that's not something just to gloss over and to say, well, they mean Babylonians. No, they're talking about, in particular, these very capable group with its strata within the Babylonian kingdom.
Was it a family or was it a location?
No, it's really, if you will, it's a weird thing because Chaldea, the Kazdim is was an area, right? It's perhaps like the inner city. That's not the right word. The hub of intelligence, always going back all the way to Abraham, going all the way back to the ziggurats, going all the way back to writing. There, remember, Abraham is from Ur Kasdim, which is the city of the Chaldeans, which implies that Abraham was part of this group of the highest level of kind of technology within Babylonia, within Mesopotamia, within that region. So it's a regional area, but when we see that word, we're really talking about the people, the Chaldeans, who are like the people who are like the inner people and of like the real root people of that area. And by the way, I mentioned this the other day, I think on Wednesday night. That's the same thing that goes on in Iran today. The original Persian people of Iran have great pride that they're the original people of Iran. The Azeris and the Kurds and everybody else who lives in that country is, as far as they're concerned, interlopers. And again, there probably was a little of that in, not a little of that, but there was probably a little of that in that existed in Babylonia, where some of the kingdoms and some of the rulers were not Chaldean. Like Nebuchadnezzar or some of these other kings were not necessarily Chaldean, but they lived in the region and they were powerful and they had, their family, their dynasty took power. But there's this group, the Chaldeans, that are the guys that are a part of those inner circle. Now, sometimes it seems as though it's not necessarily an ethnicity, but it is the fact that they've kind of been put into this caste of wise, powerful, magical, in some cases, people, because oftentimes the Chaldeans are seen not just as smart people, but people who possess magic, almost again like the Egyptian court that we have in the story of Moses, that these Egyptians just had access to technology that other people didn't have. And it could be that, again, that the technology is stuff that you and I would say is child's play today, but that they understood, certain chemical, properties, and they knew how to make an explosion. They knew how to create a little bit of pyrotechnics. But whatever they had, it looked like magic to most people. It looked like, supernatural powers to some people. And so sometimes when we see the word Chaldean, it doesn't just mean like an ethnicity, but it seems to really mean more of the technology that the person possesses, that Chaldean technology. And remember, that exists even to the time of Jesus when we talk about the three wise men of the East, that they're steeped in this kind of Mesopotamian Chaldean technology, and they had access to, prophecy and wisdom. And you'll see that in this story because it's juxtaposed with God's power, with real power, which again is what we had with Egypt, with the Egyptian magicians and courtiers who are shown to be not as powerful as God. But just remember that. I mean, this is part of the story. That's why I want you to pay attention to it. That's why we're talking about it. So this is the first, if you will, this is the first tale of Daniel and his crew. Well, we haven't even met him yet, but here we go.
The king allotted daily rations to them from the king's food and from the wine he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's service.
And by the way, that sounds a little bit like Esther, right? Right? Like the preparation time. Esther had to be prepared before she could enter, the king's harem, if you will. These guys have
So
to
do
be.
we find that they're eunuchs?
Well, that's the thing. At least at this stage so far, we have not had the words that we would have for the fact that he's a eunuch, which is a sari. Oh, yeah, we did. Sorry. Oh, no. We had Ashpenaz, who's called called the chief officer. He is a saris. He's a saris. So Ashpenaz might be a eunuch, but it does not say yet that they are going to be sarisim. Not yet. Not yet. I'm just telling you what the language says. The only person who's a saris, and they didn't even translate saris as a eunuch, they translated it as an officer. But they call him Ashpenaz Rav Sarisim, the chief officer. I don't know. Does the King James say the chief eunuch? Yeah. So look, the King James preserves the truth to some extent, even when you don't want to see it. Mary just told me it says chief of the eunuchs. Rav Sarisim says chief of the eunuchs. So the King James Bible had no issue calling it out. We do. First of all, we don't want him to be a eunuch, obviously. We don't want Daniel to be a eunuch. It makes us uncomfortable, but uncomfortable. But it is a possibility because the word saris is usually not just an officer. We have other words for that. It's not this word, which is why the King James feels comfortable using that. We don't feel as comfortable, which is why this more Jewish translation did not translate it as that. But anyways, it didn't say. It doesn't say they're sarisim yet. I want to say that. I'll point out to you where this gets questionable. All right, so here they are.
Among them were the Judahites, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I'm sorry, Azariah. Yeah, I said that right. Okay. The chief officer gave them new names. He named Daniel Belshazzar, Hananiah Shadrach, Mishael Mishach, and Azariah Abed-Nego.
Yeah. So they all had really good Jewish names and really good Hebrew names. Why do I say that really good Hebrew names? Because they all have God in their names, right? They're legitimately, these are good Jewish names. Daniel has the name El, it means the judge of God. Hananiah, right, it has the name Han, the root for grace. So we have that in Hannah or Yochanan, John. Hananiah, the grace of God. Azariah, Mishael, they all have God's name. El or the help of God. They all have good Jewish names, real good Jewish names. They have God's name in them. Their names become as pagan and as Babylonian as you can get because now they've put in Babylonian gods' names. Bel, the god Belshazzar, Shadrach, Abednego, a servant of the god Nego. These are as pagan as you can get. Their names are good pagan names. It's just literally like taking, a kid named Joshua and name him Christopher in America.
Oh my God, that's what I was just thinking.
It's not really good. There's not really a good example because most Christian names are also Jewish names, but be like naming a really good Jewish kid Moshe and you called him Mark after that. But they'd be like, geez, man, you put the god of war. You named him after the god of war. His name was Moshe, but that doesn't even have God's name in it. So that's not even a good name. It's a name that has God's name in it, and you turn it into something different. That's what they did. They renamed these kids, which is exactly what happened to Esther too, right? They named Esther. That was not her name. It was Hadassah. We're going to name her Ishtar. We're going to name her after a Babylonian goddess. So that's what she did. They got renamed, these 4 kids. Take new names. And what do they do with these guys? What happened?
Interesting. These names did not become part of the Jewish name selections, unlike Esther and Mordecai.
Yeah. And not only that, I would say the Hebrew names are not super, super popular either. I mean, look, it could be that, again, those were much more popular Hebrew names in those days. Azariah has become a little bit more popular in Israel today, but most of these other names, Mishael is not a common name. Hananiah, yes.
You hear, yeah.
Hananiah is not uncommon, but it's not, Hani or Honey, those are kind of like, more derivatives of it that people use, but Hananya, I think it's just maybe because they're longer names, but Hananya is not like super popular, but it's, of any of those names, it's the most popular. But yeah, Daniel always
A
was.
bunch of those in my family now.
Yeah, but not Azarias. Um,
Oh,
so
sorry.
yeah, it's a good point. Those names, these pagan names did not make it.
Did not become
Belshazzar definitely didn't make it. There's not a lot of Belshazzars walking around, though that's a really cool name. I mean, you name somebody Belshazzar, and you know, you mean business if you name yourself Belshazzar. I think. I mean, I think that's a quite a name. The only Belshazzar I can think of is Belshazzar Getty. Whatever happened to Belshazzar Getty? But I mean, it's a tough name. I mean, you carry that name in carry that name in life. People are going to pay attention to you.
I mean, it doesn't fit on the old bubble forms for SATs. It would be too long.
Balthazar Getty is still working. He was in Megalopolis. He's still working. Not a lot, but every couple of years he pops up into a movie. Um, but yeah, that's a quite a name. Of course, he was also, you know, John Paul Getty III's son. So, um, he's not worried about money, I assume. I don't know why he even said that, but yes, there's not a lot of Belshazzars or Balthazars. There's different versions of that name, but I there's that guy, there was that actor too, Meshach Taylor, the guy that
Oh
was
yeah,
in
Michelle
a lot of
Taylor.
stuff. The names um, don't pop up a lot, but in any form, but they get sometimes. Not real Jewish names, I would say, but to Judah's point. All right, but here's the first story of what happens to these kids. Miracles. Miracles are happening every chapter. Little miracle.
Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food or the wine he drank. So he sought permission of the chief officer not to defile himself. And God disposed the chief officer to be kind and compassionate toward Daniel. The chief officer said to Daniel, I fear that my lord the king, who allotted food and drink to you, will notice that you look out of sorts, unlike the other youths of your age, and you will put my life in jeopardy with the king.
Yeah, so Daniel and his crew say, we're not going to eat this food. Or at
Well,
least Daniel
Daniel
said he
said that,
wasn't going to.
yeah,
Daniel said he wasn't,
we don't know
but
about the crew.
what?
We
What?
don't know about the crew.
Yeah, well, we'll see it in a second. But yeah, Daniel, as the kind of the leader of the group, says, yeah, we're not going to eat this food. We're not going to eat trafe, right? Now, this is obviously tells us a little bit about what Jewish life might have been like, in the diaspora already. So keeping kosher is a problem, especially if you're in the king's house. And the king's house, you got to eat what the king gives you, and the king's actually giving you food from his table. So it'd be very rude not to eat it. So much so that the chief officer, the chief eunuch, the master of the eunuchs, whatever you want to call him, Lord Varus says,
Lord Ferris.
I like it that he's Lord Varus, but the head guy says, you're gonna get me killed if you don't eat. You don't eat, you're going to look sick. And then he's going to think I did something. I'm not taking good care of you, whatever. And I'm going to be the one responsible. You're going to put my life in jeopardy. So he says, look, I mean, you can eat whatever you want, dude, but not if it's going to get me killed, which is fair, right? It's a fair thing to say.
Daniel replied to the guard, whom the chief officer had put in charge of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test your servants for 10 days, giving us legumes to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the youths who eat of the king's food, and do with your servants as you see fit.
Yeah, this is the original bean and water diet. Don't try this diet at home, please. Don't say, I heard this diet on on, on Bible. The Bible told me I'm on a bean and water diet. Yeah, this will wreck your this will wreck your innards. But yeah, there's an interesting thing here, which is there are people, I will say, um, who engage in what's sometimes called a Daniel fast. It's not done by us Jews because this is not something that we're going to do unless we really have to. Uh, so it's fast is based on the lifelong kosher diet of the Jewish prophet Daniel and the 3 morning fast in which Daniel abstained from all meat and wine. So it says that some people do it during Lent, but you can also do it in other times. Yeah, this is a fast where you just don't eat any, in some cases, meat, dairy, alcohol. Some people don't eat bread. And they do it as more of a devotional way of trying to elevate their spirit. And here's a wonderful picture of that. The boys in front of Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, so this is a Daniel fast. It's not a good, healthy way to eat unless, of course, you're eating vegetables and other stuff, in which case you kind of live in a vegetarian diet. But yeah, people found it interesting that they did have protein on this diet, and they did
It
have
was
probably
vegan.
a little bit of carbs on this diet. But yeah, it's a very difficult diet to.
Basically, it's vegan.
Yeah, it's vegan. It is true. It's not just vegetarian, it's vegan. But again, it would really wreck your stomach. You'd have a lot of fiber, I guess. You'd have a lot of protein and maybe some carbs, but you would not, unless you were having some other vegetables, you would not be getting any minerals or vitamins. So this would not be a good way to eat. Definitely not for an extended period of time. So
Doesn't sound appetizing to me.
no, John. No, John. But this is not a fun diet for sure. But what is that? What happens when these guys eat this diet?
He agreed to this plan of theirs and tested them for 10 days. When the 10 days were over, they looked better and healthier than all the youths who were eating of the king's food. Well, there was no gout. So the guard kept on removing their food and the wine they were supposed to drink and gave them legumes. God made all 4 of these young men intelligent and proficient in all writings and wisdom, and Daniel had an understanding of visions and dreams of all kinds.
Yeah, but I gotta tell you, man, these kids, they wanted chicken soup and rogalach and other stuff. You know that, right? Or whatever the Jewish version
Chocolate is a fruit.
2,500 years ago, whatever that version
Chocolate's
of it
a
is.
fruit.
Okay.
It grows on
So
trees.
yeah, but they thrived. They thrived with this, and they also became very proficient in all of the things that they were being taught. They were good students. Picked up their picked up the information that their people wanted them to learn. Like most good Jewish kids going to school, they learned everything that they needed to learn. Even this, again, stuff that wasn't necessarily, as the rabbis point out, stuff that they should have been learning. They learned all the stuff that these people gave them. And of course, for the rabbis, they're also learning Torah, and they're keeping their Jewish texts up too. But in order to be successful, they had to know this information. We know that. It wasn't their choice either. They're essentially being held.
When the time the king had set for their presentation had come, the chief officer presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with them, and of them all, none was equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So these entered the king's service.
Yeah. So, like Esther, they come out on top. In this case, let's hope it was just because of their knowledge. But yeah, they get to go into the king's service because they are the best. They prove themselves the best at picking up this information.
Whenever the king put a question to them requiring wisdom and understanding, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and exorcists throughout his realm.
Yeah, I will say that translation for exorcists is an interesting translation. What does the King James say? I'm sure it says magicians for the first, but what does it say for the second? Astrologers is the translation that they went with the word asafim. Um, could be astrology, could be some kind of necromancy, the could be some kind of fortune telling. This translation definitely wanted to go with the necromancy stuff, which is they're talking to dead people or they're using some kind of powers to get rid of demons. Um, it's an interesting choice to go with the more magical part of, or not even magical, the more, um, you know, I mean, you use the word exorcist, for us, our minds are automatically going to some guy, coming in with a cross, trying to get rid of the, Linda Blair thing. But I mean, it's possible. But the word has some type of connotation of um, some type of usage of hidden knowledge.
Where else
This
do we
isn't the
see those
normal
two?
stuff that people do. Most people can't do this. They can't do either of those things. They can't be hartamim. They also can't be asafim. Those are not things that you and I can just do with wisdom, uh,
Where
just
else do
learning.
we see those two words specifically in
What was
reference?
that?
Where else do we see those two words?
Hartumim we see with the magicians in Egypt. Same word.
Okay.
Asafim, interestingly, I don't know if it's been used yet in I don't know if that I don't know if it is when the first time it's used or how often it's used. I mean, I'm just looking at how many times it's used. I think this might be the first time it's used as a word. It's oftentimes translated as astrologer or astronomer. Um, I think in later sources, but again, the way we're gonna translate this in it's not the word that's used by the rabbis for astrology, which is I think kind of the which is kind of the um, which is why they translated it this way. I'm just looking real quick to I'm looking real quick to um, what kind of words are used the most for because by the time of the Talmud, there's like good astrology and kind of bad astrology. The people who worship the stars are called Ovdei Kochavim, the ones who worship the stars, and then the Mazalim, the people who are studying the constellations, are more like astronomers and astrologers than people who like worship these things as gods. So it's an interesting thing to me because I happen to be interested in that the stars, the way that they are treated in the Torah and the Talmud. So it's a personal thing. But here, this translation didn't even want to go down that road, which is why they translated as exorcists. They're like, this has nothing. We're going to say this has nothing to do with stars. So to answer the question, this is actually the first time that this word is used. You know, the name Asaph is used in the Bible as Asaph is one of the Levite musicians, but the fact that there's a connection to that, I mean, the rabbis try to make a connection, but this is why in the Jewish translations we don't even translate this as astrologers, but it could be very well be. But we'll see these characters pop up in the story, especially in these first chapters. These guys that are supposed to have the answers. So the interesting thing is that it's not one science. I will say that. Like Hartumim is definitely kind of like magic. and however you want to translate Asafim, and however, the other words that we're going to have pop up, we'll see come up. However you're going to translate these are different, like, if you will, they're different sciences, and there probably were different people that were specialists in these different genres, but they're these
Dasha,
guys are these guys are better than all of them because, of course, they have
right.
God. That's going to be their point.
And Ashrafim doesn't show up anywhere else other than the book of Daniel.
I'm not sure. I think this is the
That's
first. Well, wait a second.
AI
It
generated.
probably hasn't. It hasn't. You can look it up, by the way. Someone wants to do this as we're doing it. I don't think that. I think this is the first time, and it may be the only time, that the word Asafim as a title, which is one of the reasons why you can have such variant translations, because it's such a unique word. But Hartumim is not a well, it's not a common word in the Bible, but it's not the first time we've seen it. So again, just so you know, when we talk about it's interesting. I do think that there's kind of a stylistic thing I want to point out. There is kind of a stylistic thing that when you want to talk about when you want to talk about when you want to talk about like magic, I think, and maybe it's not just magic. I have to think about this, but it's probably just like more of a literary technique. I'm just going to show you. So when we talk about in Exodus, where we talk about, the Pharaoh having people like that, it says, he brings out sages and sorcerers, which are chachamim and maschafim, which is a different word, magic, maschafim. And then it says, and the Egyptian Hartumei Mitzrayim, right? The Hartumim, that's the same word, right? Which they translated as priestly magicians. But they were definitely seen as like a special thing. The Egyptian magicians were like, every time you see them doing their thing, they're trying to recreate the plagues, right? They do this. And it's not just with the Nile turning to blood, when he makes the other plagues happen, he says, I'm just going to show you like one of them. I'll just show you one. So the Hartumim said to Pharaoh, hey, we can't do this stuff, right? So the magicians, they couldn't do it. And there's the Hartumim. But what's interesting, again, is, so that's a title, if whatever you want to call, the wonder workers of, however you want to translate it. There are people who can do things like this. But I mainly wanted to point out that when you trot these people out, right, it's not just one thing, right? It's not just the magicians. It's the magicians, the sorcerers, the wise people. Like, so, it's like, you want to say we got everybody, the sages, the sorcerers, and the magicians. Like, they're different sciences, or there's different like groups of people that are doing these things, and none of them can do it. Like, if you just said it was the magicians, well, what about the sorcerers? Or I don't know, whatever you want to call them. What about these people? You could have brought out those people to try to fix it. No. So that's what you have here too. And again, I'm just showing you that this word is not uncommon, but this word is, and some other words that are going to pop up for these kinds of people to do so. And it is critical because Daniel and his buddies are not those. They're not that. They're just much better. But here's the way the chapter ends. This one line.
Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus.
Yeah, Melech Koresh, King Koresh, David Koresh. That's where he got his name from, by the way. I've told you that before. David Koresh, the leader of the Branch Davidians, took his name from the Jewish Messiah, David, and the Gentile Messiah, King Koresh, the one who let the Jews go back. So King Cyrus is a hero, as we're going to read at the end of the very end of our Bible in the book of Chronicles, or we're going to read when we read Chronicles. Koresh is the one who let the Jews go back and rebuild the temple, and the rabbis point out, look, you read what it says in the Bible, he seems to be the Messiah. He seems to be God's chosen one. And as I mentioned last week, Perhaps we can return the favor to King Koresh and the Persians by getting rid of the current regime and helping them find freedom and liberty. Wouldn't that be ironic? Wouldn't it be beautiful karma to help the Persians enter into a new world? They weren't ruled by tyrants. Well, that tells you how long Daniel is there for, which is a long time. Daniel's going to be there for a long time. So it's almost telling us, well, maybe not the end of the story, but it tells us he's going to last a long time, which is important because it's kind of a spoiler. Because Daniel's going to go through a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to really test his life. And we already know he's going to make it. So that's not the way you normally want to tell a story. You let the people know. Well, I guess it's whenever you tell a story and there's a guy, old in bed retelling the stories of his past. I guess he lived through those stories. So it's kind of a problem. Whenever you do a prequel and you kind of know the guy's going to live. So, yeah, there's that. They kind of gave away the ending. Well, it's not really the ending, but he's going to be okay. He's going to live through this stuff. So, yeah, I'd rather that line not be here just for the dramatic tension that we could otherwise ramp up in this story, especially as we're start to see the first. Well, that was a little bit of tension, like he's going to die because he's only eating beans and water, or somebody's going to die because he's only eating beans and water. But now we're really going to get some more very clear, you're going to get killed kind of stuff. So let's read chapter 2, shall we?
In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. His spirit was agitated, yet he was overcome by sleep. The king ordered the magicians, exorcists, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to be summoned in order to tell the king what he had dreamed. They came and stood before the king.
Yeah, so he's got everybody, right? You can bring all the specialists. Again, this is early on in his reign. Sounds a lot like Joseph, right? Who becomes the interpreter of Pharaoh's dreams, which is how he gets power. It's a similar setup. And Daniel is very much like Joseph in a lot of ways, in that he's in the inner circle. And again, like the Egyptian story we read, and here we actually have that word that we had in the Egyptian story, the machshafim, the sorcerers, they translated it as. But here again, the Kasdim are almost again like a separate thing, right? They're a separate group. And it doesn't really seem to be indicative of their ethnicity. It seems to be, again, this caste of people who know this kind of wisdom. So assumedly, like Daniel is part of that group because he's being educated in the Chaldean ways, in the magic or the knowledge, the secret society of the Chaldeans. I mean, whatever you want to say, but like the Chaldeans are parallel with the sorcerers and the exorcists and the magicians, right? And so they're all brought to Nebuchadnezzar, like the Pharaoh, to interpret a dream. But it's not that simple because Nebuchadnezzar is smart. Well, he's deviously smart, but he's like, I don't want you to tell me what my dream means. I want you to tell me my dream. Because if you can tell me my dream, then you really know what you're talking about. If you come and I tell you a dream and then you tell me what it means, it just means you're really good at interpreting dreams. It means that, you're a good psychoanalyst. But I want to test your power. Because if you can tell me what it is, you must be gifted. This must be powerful. So that's what it says. Tell the king what he had dreamed. That's the key thing here. It's not just dream interpretation. It's literally knowing what he dreamed.
And the king said to them, I've had a dream and I am full of anxiety to know what I have dreamed. The Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Relate the dream to your servants, and we will tell its meaning.
And again, here it says the words in Aramaic. So the fact that now this chapter is now in Aramaic, chapter 2 is now in Aramaic, makes sense because, oh, the king's going to be speaking in Aramaic. The Chaldeans are speaking in Aramaic. We're speaking Aramaic. And that's what it says, Aramit. And you can hear the difference. The first part of it is in Hebrew. Again, this part is now going to be thrown out this Aramaic. But this line has Hebrew and Aramaic in it. I'll show you. I'm not going to point out every Aramaic. All the Aramaic. It doesn't make sense. This is Aramaic. This is not. I have nightmares of having to learn Aramaic in rabbinical school because I never learn Aramaic. No one learns Aramaic unless you're from Syria or Iraq. But yeah, you have to read Talmud. You really do. Well, you don't have to become proficient in it, but you have to learn the vocabulary a little bit, and you have to learn the grammar a little bit. But here it is. Vayirabru hakazdim lamelech, that's in Hebrew, Aramit. And then it says, Malka la'almin chayet amar chalma. So from here on, they spoke to him in Aramaic, Malka. Malka is king. It's melech. It's almost the same word, Malka. And then you know the word Halom means dream. In Aramaic, it's Chelma. It's almost the same word.
Isn't Malka a Yiddish name?
What?
Isn't Malka a Yiddish name? Malka?
Malka is from the feminine form. So here's the thing that's confusing for it, right? In Hebrew, Melech is king and Malka is queen. In Aramaic, the word Malka is king because it's not a hey at the end of it, it's an aleph. So Malka is Melech. So it's a little confusing when you go back and forth if you're listening to it and didn't have it written for you. Malka, you'd think he's talking, if you were talking in Hebrew, you'd be saying it's a queen. Nope. Once you're talking in Aramaic, Malka is king. Almin is like olam, forever. The words are very similar. They're a little different. And again, we know Aramaic, most of us as Jews know it, because when we say Mourner's Kaddish, we're laying out Aramaic in a long, that's about the longest Aramaic we speak. But when we say Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach, we mean may God's Shem, instead of Shem may, Shem Mevorach, may it be blessed. And then we say Le'alma Olmaya, Le'olam, forever and ever. Almay Almaya. That's the Aramaic version of Le'olam Va'ed, forever and ever. So we hear the words sounding differently. The other Aramaic we know a little bit is Chad Gad Yah. But most of us just do Chad Gad Yah. We don't do Bitrei Zuze, which means for two Zuzim. We usually even say that in English. But Bitrei Zuzim is Shnei Zuzim. With Aramaic, it's Bitrei Zuzim. So the Aramaic, I've explained this to people really simply. Aramaic is a transitional language, if you will, between Hebrew and Arabic. So there's Aramaisms in Hebrew and there's Aramaisms in Arabic, and it's kind of a little bit of both. And so people who know Arabic can figure out a little bit of Aramaic, and people who speak Hebrew can figure out a little bit of Aramaic. But it's hard for people in Hebrew and Arabic to sometimes pick up everything. It's not obviously if you're saying shalom or salam, but there's other words that are very different. But Aramaic, if you looked at the way, for example, you count in Aramaic, it's a little bit like Hebrew, but also a little bit like Arabic. You can see, if you can see a little bit of the language, you'll go, oh yeah, that makes sense. So if you lined up the three languages, you'll see that Aramaic is kind of a little bit between both. And that's not a coincidence. It's because it was a kind of a transition language between those two areas. So, and Aramaic was spoken throughout the Middle East all the way up through the time of Jesus. So Jesus probably knew a little bit of Hebrew. I mean, he could understand Hebrew, but he spoke Aramaic on a daily basis, which is why when they made Passion of Christ, they filmed it in Aramaic, because it would not have been accurate for Jesus to be speaking Hebrew, would not have been accurate for him to be speaking Greek, it would not have been accurate for him to be speaking Latin, but he would have, if you wanted to hear his voice, he would have been speaking Aramaic, which is why they did that. And the crew had to, the cast and crew, were sitting there talking in Aramaic. It's crazy, but it's commitment, I guess you can say, to getting into the method of really speaking Aramaic. So I'm not going to point it out a lot when we get to Aramaic, but again, Aramaic, or the flow of Aramaic specifically from the Kaddish, and a little bit from other things in the Haggadah besides. I mean, I'm joking when I say Chad Gadya, because it's also in Halach Ma'anya. It's also in, this is Halechem Oni. This is the bread of affliction, the bread of poverty, and Halach Ma'anya. You can hear the ah at the end of the words. It's a good rule of thumb that if you're reading Hebrew and you hear yourself saying a lot of ahs at the end of things, you're speaking Aramaic at that point. You're no longer speaking Hebrew. You've gone into Aramaic. So that is what you'll hear in the background when we're reading in English. You'll hear the words in Aramaic. But and that, by the way, makes the book of Daniel unique, and that it's written, a good chunk of it, in Aramaic, where most of our Bible does not have very much Aramaic in it. Not so with Daniel. So keep that in mind. But to the point, the Chaldeans are the ones who speak up when they're talking to, when they're getting the king's direction. King, live forever and ever, right? That's a great way to speak to the king, But then he says, they say to him, tell us your dream, king, and we'll tell you what it means. Okay, that's not what he said. He said, you tell me my dream. So the Chaldeans say, tell us the dream, king. We'll tell you what it means. We know what it means.
The king said in reply to the Chaldeans, I hereby decree, if you will not make the dream and its meaning known to me, you shall be torn limb from limb and your houses confiscated.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by here's some drama. Here's some real drama. This is not about just getting caught eating the wrong thing, not eating the right thing. No, you don't tell me and you're going to die in a horrible, horrible way, right? You're going to be torn limb from limb. You're not just going to be executed. I'm going to pull the appendages off your body and you lose all your property. So, yeah, I told you to tell me the dream. I don't need you to tell me what the dream means. Tell me what my dream was. Wow, that is a scary proposition for these guys.
But if you tell the dream and its meaning, you shall receive from me gifts, presents, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its meaning.
Yeah. But if you can't tell me the dream, you go home with these fabulous gift prizes. Door number 1, we're tearing your limbs off. Door number 2, you go home with a broil. It's a tough situation to be looking at for these people. Not good. And that's what happens when you have a king like Nebuchadnezzar who can do things like this and who's capable of doing things like this. The story only works because we know that King Nebuchadnezzar did fantastic things like this.
Once again, they answered, let the king relate the dream to his servants, and we will tell its meaning. The king said in reply, it is clear to me that you are playing for time, since you see that I have decreed that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one verdict for you. You have conspired to tell me something false and fraudulent until circumstances change. So relate the dream to me, and I will then know that you can tell its meaning.
And that's fair, right? Prove to me that you know the dream, then I know what you're going to say is true. I'll trust you. Because otherwise, you're just going to tell me something either that I want to hear or that you want me to hear because it's good for you, right? You're going to tell me to go out and buy, AT&T. You have AT&T. You're the guys telling somebody, on CNBC what stock to buy, and you have that stock. I don't want to hear that. That's just a bunch of lies. He knows. Don't tell me, right? Tell me what my dream was. Then I can trust you. Then I know you mean business.
The Chaldeans said in reply to the king, "There is no one on earth who can satisfy the king's demand. For the great king or ruler, none has ever asked such a thing of any magician, exorcist, or Chaldean."
Yeah, and there you get it again. There's the word asaf, right? There's the exorcist and the Chaldean or the magician. What is their answer at this point?
Nobody can do
Nobody
it.
can do this. Nobody can do this. You're asking us to do something that nobody could do. But what's really wonderful about that answer is the second part, right? What's the second part of it?
No one else has asked us that.
What?
No one else has asked us that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're asking us something that no one's ever asked for. It's on you. You're asking us for something ridiculous. It's you that's got a problem, which is a pretty courageous thing to say. But at this point, why not? I mean, they're saying, why are you asking for this? No one's asked us for this before. And so they're saying it's on you. You're asking us to do something we can't do. And that's your problem. But again, at this stage, what else do they have to lose? Because they're going to die if they can't do it, right? So
The thing asked by the king is difficult. There is no one who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose abode is not among mortals.
yeah, we don't have access to that information. The gods do, but interestingly, they say we don't have that information. Gods don't talk to us. They don't live here. And again, this is, they're saying this all in Aramaic. This does not sit well.
Whereupon the king flew into violent rage and gave an order to do away with all the sages of Babylon. The decree condemning the sages to death was issued. Daniel and his companions were about to be put to death. When Daniel remonstrated with Arioch, the captain of the royal guard, who had set out to put the sages of Babylon to death.
Now, Daniel's like, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm going to get killed because these guys can't answer the question. And we're part of this crew, which by the way is insane because Nebuchadnezzar is going to kill all of his wise people because they can't do this. They can't answer this question, which is, seemingly impossible. It's pretty tough. And he's going to wipe everybody out from his brain trust because they can't do this. It's a crazy thing to do, but he's prepared to do it. And Daniel's going to get swept up into it. And Daniel basically says, whoa, wait a second here. No, I ain't getting killed. Don't put me with these guys. And by the way, you notice that this guy, Arioch, his name is Arioch. He is Rav Tapia. They use the Aramaic word for the captain of the guard. He's the chief of the military. This is definitely a military position, but this is different than the Rav Sarisim, right? Rav means, like we say rabbi, the master of, the Sarisim. This is the Rav Tabachia. This is the Rav of the military, royal, or at least the royal guard. So these are, the police force, if you will. So, and these are the guys who are now supposed to kill all these sages. So all of them together are the Hakime, which is the Hachamim, Hakime, and Hachamim Bavel would be in Hebrew, and Hakime Bavel in Aramaic. He's going to kill them all.
He spoke up and said to Arioch, the royal officer, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Thereupon Arioch informed Daniel of the matter. So Daniel went to ask the king for time, that he might tell the meaning to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, of the matter, that they might implore the God of heaven for help regarding this mystery, so that Daniel and his colleagues would not be put to death together with the other sages of Babylon.
Yeah, and here we have this word, al-raza, the mystery. We're going to have this word a few times in this book, raza, which is why I titled this The Mystery, Daniel Full of Mystery, because this raza is what the book calls it. I mean, that's the word here, mystery. So Daniel says, wait a second, give me some time. Get a message to the king, hold it. Let's just figure this out. Let me get to you. Now he says the meaning again. He's not saying I'm going to tell you the dream yet. He's still saying the meaning, but he kind of gets it, right? And here's what happens with the mystery.
The mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel spoke up and said, "Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power are God's. Who changes times and seasons, removes kings and installs kings, who gives the wise their wisdom and knowledge to those who know, who reveals deep and hidden things, knows what is in the darkness, with whom light dwells. I acknowledge and praise you, O God of my ancestors, you who have given me wisdom and power, for now you have let me know what we asked of you. You have let us know what concerns the king."
Yes, and this is this beautiful prayer of Daniel. Daniel says, God knows these. God has this wisdom, right? He does this all. He's doing all these things. And he gives us, and this prayer is in Aramaic, you know. He knows these things. And sometimes you give it to us. And God, you gave me wisdom and power. So this prayer comes out of his ability now to comprehend what the king has dreamt and what it means. So he now he has the secret. He has this information. And so he acknowledges God's miracle in the fact that he has this information now. So now he has it. He knows it. He's got the message. He's got unlocked the secret. And we read about dreams. Remember Michael and Mary and anyone who was there on our Talmud classes when we talked about dreams. The Talmud puts a lot of stock still in dream interpretation. The rabbis famously say that a dream uninterpreted is like a letter unopened. That we get messages and we have to interpret them. We have to figure out what they mean. And sometimes they can be interpreted different ways, but it still is kind of our obligation to try to figure out what this means, what these dreams mean. And some dreams are very powerfully giving us messages. They're telling us things. We have to unlock them. And in this case, of course, Daniel's unlocking someone else's dream, which is even harder. But we're meant to, in some cases, interestingly, the rabbis point out that we can't interpret our own dreams. We have to kind of explain it to somebody else. We don't sometimes, again, we need to have a little distance is necessary for the interpretation, for the understanding to happen. So they recognize that. And it's still, it's still something that we talk about and in some cases, in especially in more religious communities, that people talk about their dreams and interpret them. And in some cultures, it's a very important part of understanding things. In some cultures, Native American in particular, but lots of kind of more Aboriginal groups focus on dream interpretations and visions that people can hopefully access wisdom from. And this wisdom oftentimes, of course, comes from within us. It's just stuff that we need to unlock. We have the answers, we just sometimes don't see it. So Daniel has seen what the king has dreamt, and here's what happens.
Thereupon Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to do away with the sages of Babylon. He came and said to him as follows: "Do not do away with the sages of Babylon. Bring me to the king, and I will tell the king the meaning." So Arioch rushed Daniel into the king's presence and said to him, "I have found among the exiles of Judah a man who can make the meaning known to the king."
So he tells him right away, I got a Jewish kid. He doesn't, this is not like Esther where his identity is hidden. He's told right away, this is a kid from Judah. He knows the meaning.
The king said in reply to Daniel, who was called Belshazzar, "Can you really make known to me the dream that I saw and its meaning?"
Yeah, so king's very clear. I don't want to just hear the meaning. I want you to tell me the dream I had, right? You tell me my dream and its meaning. You got to do both. I'm not going to accept one. You got to do both.
Daniel answered the king and said, "The mystery about which the king has inquired, sages, exorcists, magicians, and diviners cannot tell to the king."
And by the way, there another thing I want to tell you. I don't want to harp on this, but every time they add to this list of things that can be used for magic, you had the exorcist or the asafin, you have the chachamim, the sages, you have magicians, the hartumim, and here you also have gazrin on another one that was added to it, which they translated as diviners. Can they yachlin? Can they yachol? Can they tell you? Are they able to tell the king? No, no, they don't know it, right? They can't do it because
But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, who has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what is to be at the end of days. This is your dream and the vision that entered your mind in bed. O king, the thoughts that came to your mind in your bed are about future events. The revealer of mysteries has let you know what is to happen.
yes. And this is another name for God that we haven't had yet, but it's kind of an interesting name. The Gale Razia, the revealer of mysteries, which is why it's capitalized, because it's a name of God, at least in Aramaic. Sounds kind of magical. Gale Razia. Gale Razia. Yeah, it sounds magical. But Raze and in Hebrew, it's the same word, Raza, or Rosim are the secrets, mysteries. But that's God, the revealer of mysteries. It's a nice way of also understanding God as a revealer of mysteries, because the mystery is there, but God's going to tell it. God's going to reveal it. I've mentioned before, the Aramaic word that you know that's the most magical name. Word in Aramaic is, of course,
Abracadabra.
yes, abracadabra. I will create as I say. Abara means I will create. Kedabra as I said. Do as I, appear as I say. Abracadabra is the Aramaic word that you guys all know for making magic. But Galirazia is another Aramaic word you can now know, an Aramaic phrase, the revealer of mysteries. Sounds like a great name for a magician. Galirazia. All right. Here's what he says.
Not because my wisdom is greater than that of other creatures has this mystery been revealed to me, but in order that the meaning should be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. O king, as you looked on, there appeared a great statue. This statue, which was huge and its brightness surpassing, stood before you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was of fine gold. Its breast and arms were of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze. Its legs were of iron, and its feet part iron and part clay. As you looked on, a stone was hewn out, not by hands, and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. All at once, the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were crushed and became like chaff of the threshing floor of summer. A wind carried them off until no trace of them was left. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Such was the dream, and we will now tell the king its meaning. You, O king, king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given kingdom, power, might, and glory, into whose hands have been given humans, wild animals, and the fowl of heaven, wherever they may dwell, and to whom has been given dominion over them all. You are the head of gold. But another kingdom will arise after you, inferior to yours. Then yet a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the whole earth. But the fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, just as iron crushes and shatters everything, and like iron that smashes, so will it crush and smash all these. You saw the feet and the toes, part potter's clay and part iron. That means it will be a divided kingdom. It will have only some of the stability of iron, inasmuch as you saw iron mixed with common clay. And the toes were part iron and part clay. That means the kingdom will be in part strong and in part brittle. You saw iron mixed with common clay. That means they shall intermingle through marriage, but shall not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will establish a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, a kingdom that shall not be transferred to another people. It will crush and wipe out all these kingdoms, but shall itself last forever. Just as you saw how a stone was hewn from the mountain, not by hands, and crushed the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold, the great God has made known to the king what will happen in the future. The dream is sure and its interpretation reliable.
So
I
again,
guarantee it.
this is not the part of the book that really has the prophecy in it. Yet this prophecy is in that chapter. We'll explain it when we finish the chapter, but
Then King Nebuchadnezzar prostrated himself and paid homage to Daniel and ordered that a grain offering and pleasing offerings be made to him. That's weird. The king said in reply to Daniel, truly your God must be the God of gods and sovereign of kings and the revealer of mysteries to have enabled you to reveal this mystery. The king then elevated Daniel and gave him very many gifts and made him governor of the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect of all the sages of Babylon. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to administer the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself was at the king's court.
yes. So this prophecy about these kingdoms, well, first of all, what I mean, the reason that this works is because Daniel just told Nebuchadnezzar what he dreamt about. In reality, you could make the argument Nebuchadnezzar didn't really care what the meaning of the dream was. I mean, he did. I mean, he probably wanted to know whether this referred to him. But the fact that Daniel knew what he dreamt, that proved to him that Daniel had power. And so the prophecy, I mean, at the end of the day, he's the head of gold. And then Daniel says, and the kingdoms that come after you will not be as powerful. Now, look, if Nebuchadnezzar doesn't want to hear this prophecy or doesn't think the prophecy, I mean, it's a weird story from the standpoint of like, does Nebuchadnezzar really care? You can make the argument, well, he didn't really. He wanted to just know that Daniel saw the dream, and it doesn't mean he's going to die. You can make that argument. But the fact that Daniel says that these are about kingdoms and come after him, it's interesting because he doesn't say, well, how long does my dynasty last for? How many of my children get to rule after me? And the answer is not many. The news for, if you'd asked that question, would have been, you're not. Your dynasty stinks. So that's not what he gets. But Nebuchadnezzar is the head, and then the other people who come after him are the Persians, the Greeks, and then eventually what will be the Roman Empire. And then what destroys the Roman Empire, of course, is God's kingdom, the stone that becomes the mountain, and everything else is left behind is us, the Jewish people. Now, these are the earthly kingdoms, right? And then the last kingdom is the kingdom that is the mountain that's there. All the other kingdoms are going to be crushed. Now, again, Nebuchadnezzar's is the best. It's the gold. It's the most valuable. And so, if you will, Nebuchadnezzar is like given credit for it. But if you think about it, the whole thing collapses. Everything collapses in front of God. And of course, the whole concept that after Nebuchadnezzar would hear that is he offers sacrifices and recognizes God as the greatest. I mean, it's a little fantastic, right? It's just like, it seems a little much, but again, maybe he's freaked out. You can make the argument he's freaked out that Daniel knew what the dream was. But the point was not really, of course, for Nebuchadnezzar or for Daniel, but it's for us, which is a message for the Jewish people that all these other kingdoms that came before, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, eventually the Romans, who seem really powerful, that is, that's the final one. Now, again, some people say, I mean, that's the more modern, not modern, that was the later interpretation that the Romans were included in this. If this was written in 160, the last empire was probably Alexander the Great's successors, the Greco-Roman empires, which means that the first empire, the gold one, is the Babylonians. The next one would be the Persians. The next one would be Alexander the Great, and then the next one are all of Alexander the Great's successors, who are a mixture of Greek and other stuff, which is why they're mixed, like Cleopatra, who was a mixture of Greek and Egyptian, like Antiochus's dynasty, which is a mixture of Greek and Syrian, like all the rest of Alexander the Great's successor dynasties, which were mixtures of Greek and the local population. So people wanted this to be the Romans included in this, or again, you'll hear people say it goes all the way up to the modern era, because people want this prophecy to be leading up to the establishment of Israel or a new Jewish dynasty look, I believe if this was written during the time we think it was written, during the time of the Maccabees, that the Maccabees were the stone that knocks everything down, and that they conquer the Greek Syrians, Antiochus, and they're the stone that becomes a mountain. The problem, of course, is that it doesn't really happen. It doesn't happen for very long. But I believe that that's what the people who wrote this believed. So, again, the interpretations, there's different interpretations depending on when you think this is actually written, who it's written for, and which kingdoms this can take us through. But most likely, again, this is the point of this, is that eventually the Jews are going to have their own kingdom and their own control, and but of course the end of the story is that Daniel is the winner. But that's the way Daniel makes it out. We don't have time to really start in chapter 3, but which is the fiery furnace story. All of these stories kind of are all kind of predicated on the fact that Nebuchadnezzar does whatever he wants, and then he goes crazy and threatens to kill people, and they get saved. But it all works on the fact that Nebuchadnezzar is a crazy dictator. So it's an interesting book to read for many reasons, but it does open up to what we mentioned at the beginning, which is that this allows for, if you don't have the book of Daniel, it's difficult to imagine that there's a book of Revelation. It's very interesting because you can make the argument that without this type of speculation, how is there a Christianity? And I don't mean like, if there's not a Daniel, there's no Jesus, but if there isn't this type of mentality of people saying, but let's say that God is about to do amazing things, and it's going to happen this because, God is fed up with the Romans, but he's fed up with us. But if we do the right thing, he'll destroy the Romans. If you start prophesizing about these kinds of things, then it creates that kind of environment where people, will get behind that, and it leads to that type of behavior and that type of religious, activity. So it's difficult to imagine that there is a Christian religion without this type of speculation. And so the book of Daniel really is a good, link, if you will. It's kind of part of the missing link, if you will. It's not a missing link. It's never been missing, but it's that piece of information that helps us connect the two. And again, this is not necessarily what you see in the Gospels, but you see it in the book of Revelation, and you see it in this whole concept of speculation that the kingdom of God is at hand, and that we're living in times that Daniel prophesied, or that, again, the people at Qumran said the teacher of light prophesies. So that's what we deal with here. And yeah, it's a interesting thing that I think human beings have always dealt with, which is, does somebody know this stuff? Is somebody able to predict these kinds of things? And again, if they are, and if God's giving them the information, then we better pay attention. So this is again what makes the book of Daniel unique, because as much as we've had prophets up until now, the goal of the prophets spoke on behalf of God and basically said, you're not doing the right thing, and God's going to destroy us because we haven't been doing the right thing. This is not exhortation. This is not castigation. There's mysteries out here, and I'm going to explain the mysteries for you. So it's interesting. It's speculative. It's where this kind of, I don't want to say it's science fiction, but it's more speculative in that sense that it's a different genre of writing, and it's unique. So I want to thank Judith for reading today and for being a part of our teaching. And I just realized we didn't record this, but it is recorded on Facebook. And for those who are watching on Facebook, and I realize now that there's sometimes way more people on Facebook than I remember or think about. But for those who are watching on Facebook, thank you. And we will post this Facebook recording up for you. So we will have class next week and the next week, which we'll finish it. And then after Daniel, we're going to I'm taking a slight break for the summer. We don't have Wednesday night class this week, but we absolutely do have, we have a minute or so. I'm just going to share this that, this is, you know what, we should actually listen to this next week. Floyd just shared with us something that really is interesting, African-American spiritual, which is based on these guys. Actually, you know what, we have a minute or two. Let's just do it real quick. Thank you for doing this, Floyd, for putting this one out. This is a good one.
One straight shooting from the land of Israel. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego took a little trip to the land of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. He took a light of gold and made him an idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego.